Coming up, how is the Indian Health Service gearing up to protect Indian country from monkeypox? We find out. Plus, Michael Naranjo has made his mark on the world of art despite not being able to see. And we get a politics update. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We start in Alaska, where tribal governments are getting aid following severe storms. The Interior Department announced it is distributing $2.6 million to Alaska Native villages who were hit by a powerful storm in mid-September. The remains of Typhoon Merbok brought major flooding and high winds, wreaking havoc across hundreds of miles of coastline in Alaska. The aid money will go to 45 Alaska Native villages. Those villages are preparing themselves for winter as it arrives and has immediate needs for food and water. Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Brian Newland said the Biden administration will help tribal communities address ongoing impacts of climate change. The agency says the money is part of the American Rescue Plan. Staying in Alaska, new research shows there's an increased risk for children who lack access to running water. Children from rural communities in western Alaska have a 53% higher rate of getting middle ear infections, according to a Bering Strait area research program by Norton Sound Health Corporation. Young children aged 3 to 6 are the most vulnerable. For decades, a high rate of ear infections and related hearing loss among Alaska Native children had been observed. More than 1,600 school children were screened in the study. The results showed that households without running water showed increased risk. Lack of running water is a chronic problem in rural Alaska. According to the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, 22% of rural Alaska homes are dealing with this issue. Now to Macon, Georgia, where Muskogee citizens gathered recently to celebrate their culture and to advocate for their sacred lands to be protected. ICT's Pacey Smith-Garcia has the story.
A community gathering. That was the site in Macon, Georgia earlier this month. Hundreds of Muskogee people traveled to their ancestral homeland in the South for their 30th annual Okmulgee celebration. Almost 200 years ago, the Muskogee people were forcibly removed from their lands. They were taken to Oklahoma. This caused much trauma for the tribal nation, something Principal Chief David Hill explained with tears in his eyes.
We always ask before, such a beautiful place, why did you leave? We weren't asked to leave, we was forced to leave.
Now Muskogee people are pushing for their sacred Okmulgee mounds to be turned into a national park. That idea has gained some traction. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland's agency is currently undergoing a federal review of the action, and she could soon ask Congress to create Okmulgee National Park. If approved, the park will include the mounds, nearly 900 sacred sites, and 54 river miles of floodplain. The tribal citizens say this would ensure not only the preservation of their land, but the cultural survival of their people.
There was a dehumanization about removal of those who were here. It was easier to live with yourself if we were savages and we were heathens and we were these awful people that needed to be removed and off this land so that, the world could survive, so this great story and this great nation could be built. but not acknowledging that there was already a nation here of people.
Local leaders also back the idea.
This project has enjoyed deep bipartisan, multi-jurisdictional political support. We have enjoyed support from our rural partners and our urban partners inside the Okmulgee corridor.
The Interior Department is expected to finish its review this fall. In Phoenix, Arizona, Pacey Smith-Garcia, ICT News.
It has been more than a week since the United Kingdom's Queen was laid to rest, leaving some Indigenous people to acknowledge her role in different countries. Last week, the Australian government declared a nationwide public holiday for Queen Elizabeth II. The day was also marked by protests that focused on the harm the British colony caused to Indigenous Australians. The responses from Native people to the Queen's death have been mixed. Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney spoke about the link between the monarchy and colonization.
For many Indigenous Australians, the legacy of the monarchy is fraught, a complex, difficult and painful reminder of the impact of colonisation. This week has seen many wrestling with the swirling emotions.
Those who took part in rallies also called for land rights to be honored. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. He is described as the artist who sees with his hands. That's because since 1986, Michael Naranjo has been blind. Despite this, his art shows movement and expression. It captures the nature of the animal he sculpts or the person he depicts in bronze. Michael joins us today to tell us more about his unique career that has taken him all over the world. Hello, Michael.
Good morning.
It's wonderful that you can join us today. I want to jump right in here because you were blinded while serving in Vietnam. I of course, want to thank you for your service, but I'd love to hear more about the first art commission that you received once you started making a name for yourself.
One of the first art commissions I received was making a hoop dancer in front of the state capitol in New Mexico. And the dancer is going through this hoop, and he's 7 feet tall as he's going through the hoop. And if he stood up, he would be about, somewhere between 11 and 12 feet tall. So it was quite a project for me to work on, being able to only use one hand and no eyes.
That sounds like quite the project. You also lost, as you just mentioned, the use of your right hand. Maybe talk about how you've been able to sculpt such large pieces using, such limited tools.
I guess visual imagery comes into the picture a great deal. Memory is also, because I don't have anything really to look at or go by, photographs or anything, so it's all within my head. So the image in my mind relays messages to my fingertips, and what my fingertips are touching sends messages back. So it's quite a project to keep everything in proportion. It's kind of like picture puzzle, I always say, putting everything together and making it work.
You work with children who are blind, and you also teach sculpting. Do you also work with veterans groups?
I have on occasions have created workshops with veterans, yes.
That's wonderful news. Michael, you once had the amazing opportunity to feel Michelangelo's sculpture of David, and our producers were preparing me for this interview, and I thought, oh my gosh, what an experience. Tell us what that was like.
Oh, it was a dream come true. I had seen photos of it when I could see. I was able to see it for the first 22 years of my life. And on the day that I was able to look at the David with my fingers, there's a scaffolding, and the museum was closed, and they built the scaffolding for me around the David, and there are 3 levels of it. So I was able to look at Michelangelo's David for about 3 hours, and I started from the head and went down to the feet, and of course, the hair on the back of my neck stood up when I first started touching him and looking at him. An incredible moment, and the memory I'll never forget.
And had they told you or provided context as to how many people have been able to touch the sculpture before?
They've never mentioned that, but I would imagine very few. I'm sure Michelangelo and his helpers worked on it, and every 4 years or so they were dusted. So they dusted Michelangelo, the David, before I looked at it. So not very many people, because it's such a fragile, monumental piece.
I can imagine. You know, typically when you visit a museum, there are signs that tell you, caution, don't touch the art. But you have actually a different take on that concept. Tell us about the exhibits where you encourage visitors to touch the art.
All my exhibits that I have are accessible because they are created without sight and solely by touch. And so my wife writes amazing letters, and that's why we've been able to touch so many other pieces around the country and in other countries as well, sending letters ahead of time to museums.
That's wonderful that it's able to become accessible to you in that way. What are you working on right now?
At the moment, I am working on Adam and Eve. And my wife teases me and tells me, I guess you're going back to the beginning. So I create pieces from all aspects of life, religions, and time periods and cultures. So my pieces vary a great deal from animals to the human form.
Your work, of course, can be seen in the Heard Museum in Phoenix, the White House, and even the Vatican. Do you have a favorite piece to date?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. There are bits and pieces of so many pieces that are just incredible. So just the thrill of being able to touch a piece and to enjoy it and to get pleasure out of it is what is really there.
Michael, we only have a short time left here, but if someone's listening to this interview and they also have a different kind of ability and they want to delve into the world of art, what is your message to them?
No one can do it for you. And if you don't try, you don't succeed. And just go out there and do it and believe in yourself. And no art is right according to anyone else's eyes, because you made it, and the way you make it is the way it should be, and that's just the way it is. And art is beautiful, and it's lasted over the centuries.
Well, Michael Naranjo, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thank you.
Around the United States, health experts are grappling with how to handle the outbreak of monkeypox. That includes the Navajo Nation, who has been proactive in its approach. In July, the nation set up a monkeypox preparedness team, and shortly after, its tribal leadership asked President Biden to prioritize tribal communities when it comes to vaccinations. ICT senior correspondent Patty Thalahungva joins the show now with more from the Chief Medical Officer for the Indian Health Service.
Aaliyah, Indian country is still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and now tribal leaders are facing this new health threat. Dr. Loretta Christensen is here to give us an overview of monkeypox. Dr. Christensen, thank you so much for joining us. At this point, tell us, how widespread is monkeypox in Indian country?
Well, thank you for having me. And to this date, thankfully, it is not very widespread, and we're very pleased that the cases that we do have been controlled and treated very quickly.
Tell us about the vaccine and its availability at all IHS clinics, including urban Indian healthcare centers.
Yeah, so we were very successful in advocating for Indian country when the Genios and the TPOXX, the countermeasures, became available. I do thank our colleagues at ASPR. They were very supportive of what we needed, and we were able to get the product very quickly And then we distributed it out to all of our areas. Even we did store some in Alaska, even though Alaska often works very much with the state of Alaska. We still have a storage facility there where we're able to keep extra product in case they should need it. So it went to every single of our IHS areas, which included federal, tribal, and urban sites. We then advocated again for additional TPOCs so that we could pre-position and place some in each of our areas. So then that redistribution was very quick because we could just move it around the area as needed instead of asking us from the East Coast or Oklahoma actually to ship that across the country. So we're very happy that we're positioned well at this time, and we have good access for everybody across the agency and across Indian country.
All right. There's a lot of alarm because of how the monkeypox virus is spread. Let's talk about the symptoms and how long does it take for the symptoms to appear, and also describe what it looks like.
Well, characteristically, it can be a rash. It will also have pox, like when we used to have chicken pox, little raised vesicles that someone can have. And so it gets spread by prolonged skin contact. So if someone had a rash and you're holding, say, their hand, then that would be prolonged contact. Any other activities which has bodies close to each other will actually do the same thing. I do want to add, though, for safety, that even if you're caring for somebody with monkeypox, just by being around their respiratory droplets or helping them, say you're a caregiver, you can also contract the virus. So it is those two things that we have to be very careful about. And as long as those rashes and pox are active, there is some contagiousness to that, a transmissibility. You typically get flu-like symptoms. They tend to disperse in 2 to 4 weeks. So most people are well after 2 to 4 weeks. We don't see, and thankfully in Indian country, we haven't seen severe cases that have required hospitalization at this time. It is fairly a low risk infection, but with everything that happened with COVID, with all the stress and fatigue and everything everyone's had, and we were hit so hard in Indian country, we worry our patient population is much more vulnerable. So we have been very, very aggressive, very proactive in getting the education out, the word out, and making sure we have everything we need to take care of our patients properly.
And this virus is highly contagious, and not just from skin to skin contact or contact with bodily fluids, but also on surfaces. And so, how do you prevent or stay aware, for example, if you're touching a surface that somebody with monkeypox has previously touched and you can pick it up? How do you stay aware of that?
Well, we kind of reverted back to our early COVID days, if you will, when we were telling everybody, disinfect everything. If someone in your home or in your close friends and space that you usually are in, wipe everything down with our antibacterial, antiviral wipes. We want to have separate dishes, separate laundry for them. You don't want to mix your laundry together. And we've put this out. The CDC has a really great webpage on those risk factors and how to mitigate them. So we announced to everybody, just go right back to COVID, wipe everything down, put things separate, do separate laundry, take all the precautions we did all through COVID, really. We watched those things in our households. But as you well know, we have our challenges in our homes as they're multi-generational, sometimes unfortunately very small. We still have lack of running water in certain places. And so therefore it is a little bit more challenging in some communities.
And that presents an issue too, because, when as people are starting to relax their COVID restrictions, we're starting to see a lot of Native communities coming together for cultural events. So again, how do you stay aware of somebody who may have some signs, but maybe they're in denial, but they have some kind of lesion or something on their hand or their arm, because it can spread to other parts of the body. So what are some of the warning signs we should look out for?
Well, it is very visual, and if somebody would, adequately covers up their arms and they wear full clothing, then they should be fine. You should be very minimal chance of transmission. Hopefully people are honest. We've put out a lot of education. If you're going to raves or these concerts where everybody's kind of packed tightly, just be very careful, be cognizant. If you can keep some distance, please do. But it is not transmissible like COVID, where it can really go across a room and infect multiple people. It really has to be fairly close contact. So again, it's just vigilance. We tell everybody, be careful, make your choices very carefully. If you see or know someone, then you need to keep your distance. And then you need to wash your hands again and make sure that you're doing your hand hygiene, which we recommend all the time, for monkeypox as well.
All right. Is there anything else you want to have our viewers know about monkeypox?
So we are just really pushing, please get your kids, yourself up to date on every single vaccine, because the healthier you are, the more preventable these diseases are. Monkeypox, we hope to keep under good control. We're doing a great job in Indian country, thanks to all our teams across our federal, tribal, and urban sites for being so proactive, so aggressive. And thanks for the supply that we got, because we feel very comfortable with the 10,000 doses that we have right now. We have it spread nicely. And then we have our full courses of TPOXX for somebody who might get infected and we need to treat. And then I do want to mention we have what we call our TPOXX prep program out of headquarters, where we actually are setting up some centers like we did our test and treats, where you can go if you're just a high-risk patient and you think you might be exposed to monkeypox. We can give you the vaccine as a prep or ahead of time to prevent it. So we have still rolled out that program as well. So we hope we're covering all our bases and trying to take the best care of our American Indian Alaska Native population.
Dr. Christensen, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. My pleasure.
We heard earlier in our newscast that Alaska Native villages will be getting emergency relief from the Interior Department. ICT regular contributor Holly Cook-Macaro is back to tell us more about this and other policies rolling out in Indian country. Holly is a partner with Spirit Rock Consulting. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, Leah. It's good to see you.
Let's just jump right in here. Let's start on Capitol Hill. What are the most important things that you're seeing right now for Indian country?
It's another busy week in Washington, D.C. The National Indian Health Board has their meeting going on and are continuing to push the advance appropriations for the Indian Health Service. We see Rosalind So seated, and really there was a lot of action on the Hill yesterday. As you know, if you've been reading the headlines, the government funding runs out on Friday at midnight. The House and the Senate, neither chamber had passed a funding bill yet, and that was being held up by a provision in there submitted by Senator Joe Manchin as part of the deal he cut with Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi in their efforts, successful efforts, to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. All of this might seem very, like legislative minutia, but that deal had within it huge impacts for Indian country. The permitting reform deal would have rolled back tribes' ability to weigh in on would have rolled back their ability under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, would have rolled back NEPA in a number of instances, created a list of 25 high priority projects that would be designated by the president. And we all know lists like that, they live forever and would encompass projects across the United States. So there was quite a bit of pushback from the Indigenous climate justice community and weighing in and raising the red flag about those concerns. So those concerns were, I think, heard. Senator Manchin yesterday, midday, he asked Senator Schumer to withdraw his permitting reform language from as an attachment to what they're calling the continuing resolution that funds the government. And so with that withdrawal, then Senator Schumer was able to move the bill, the continuing resolution bill, to keep the government open through December 16th. And I expect that will pass the Senate but tomorrow, and the House will take it up right after that, thereby meeting the deadline of Friday evening. So that was really the cliffhanger this week. But tribes should not think that this fight on permitting reform is over. Tribal leaders, tribal climate justice activists are going to have to stay on the alert through the end of the year. Senator Manchin is going to be looking for another vehicle for this. His fellow senator from the state of West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito, also has a bill. I expect those bills to come together to some degree. We have to keep an eye on those for the environmental impacts and ability of tribes to impact and weigh in on decisions that affect our lands and waters.
Holly, unfortunately, we only had time for one question today. We'll have to catch up with you again, but thank you so much for being here.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Aaliyah.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.